for joining us tonight on another episode of The Racing Report. My name is Rob Peeters, and I'm so glad you've decided to tune in for another fabulous little half hour where we're going to talk all things motorsports because, boy, oh boy, do we have a lot to get to. Lots of stuff happening this past weekend, lots of races coming up this weekend, and we got to get you caught up on all the news and notes that you might have missed between the last episode and today. But before we do that, please be sure, if you like this show, to go ahead and follow me on social media. You can do so by looking up at rpeeters33. That's RPEETERS 33, and that helps me know that you like this show. And then also, if you really like this show, go ahead and make sure you've got that handy dandy little WTHR Plus app installed on your smart TV, because then that way it means you get brand new episodes of the Racing Report each and every week. We release every week between either Wednesday or Thursday, and we try to get those out to you as soon as possible. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right on into some of the news notes from this week. Starting off with Formula One, and the first big thing we got to talk about is Formula One has announced their sprint races for 2026. They will be held during the Chinese, Miami, Canadian, British, Dutch, and Singapore Grand Prix. So look forward to that. We've got a little bit more, some changing of the guards. You know, we won't have a sprint race in Brazil, won't have one here in the United States at Circuit of the Americas, but we will get one at the Canadian and the Singapore Grand Prix, which will be very interesting. That should be a hot one, to say the least. I think it's about a 5 o'clock local time start, which is going to be hot in Singapore around that time, but that's what Formula One has decided to go to. And we also got some news in addition to having a sprint race for the first time. The Canadian Grand Prix has also announced their planned start time for next year. And actually it directly addresses the clash with the Indianapolis 500. Now, the Indianapolis 500 typically goes green around noon. And so now we've got the Canadian Grand Prix saying we're not going to start until about 4 o'clock. So good news there for race fans hoping to not have to watch one or the other, or watch both, or not be able to watch both. Looks like that should be pretty well fixed up, so long as the Indy 500 doesn't have any serious rain affect it, because, in the past, that hasn't been a good deal when it comes to getting things out on time. So as long as the Indy 500 works and gets done at its scheduled distance and hopeful scheduled time, I think it should be pretty easy for race fans to be able to go right on in from the Indy 500 into the Canadian Grand Prix. Might miss a couple of laps depending on how much post-race, you want to watch from the Indy 500, but good to see Formula One addressing that, thinking fans first. That's always a good thing to see. Very positive news. Now for the final piece of Formula One news to get to today, the FIA has overturned the 10-second penalty that was assessed to Carlos Sainz following his collision with Liam Lawson during the Dutch Grand Prix. Sainz was additionally given 2 penalty points that have also since been rescinded. So some good news there. Seems like the FIA agreed with Williams' appeal and Sainz's appeal on that. It was a racing incident, and as a result, that penalty and those fines have been, those penalties, no fines, those penalties have been rescinded. That is it for Formula One. Now it's time to talk about IndyCar, because there's a lot of IndyCar news to get to, and it specifically is the 2026 calendar, because we have finally gotten that released over the past couple of days. We now know the tracks IndyCar is going to race at in 2026. Now you can go ahead and obviously look at IndyCar's website to find the full schedule, but I'm going to go over some of the main highlights here that are important to note. We've lost at least 2 tracks. Obviously, we already knew that the Thermal Club was not going to return for 2026, but now we have confirmation that the series will not return to Iowa, marking, I believe, the second or third time the series has dropped Iowa from its schedule. Very disappointing there for the fans in the Midwest specifically. I know it's primarily a Midwestern sport, but for those of you who probably wanted to see a race without having to travel to maybe, say, St. Louis, unfortunately, if you live out west, your only options are going to be in California, which again is basically unattainable to most people, at least not within driving distance. So disappointing news there. And then obviously IndyCar announced that Mexico City will not be on the schedule because they cited challenges regarding the World Cup next year. But we got something a bit about the World Cup because remember the World Cup is going to be on Fox. Fox will be broadcasting the World Cup in addition to having all 17 IndyCar races on their network for next year. So that is some good news. But let's get into some of the meat and details here. So St. Petersburg is going to kick off the schedule like it has the past several years. It's going to be held on March 1st, and we already talked about that. We knew that because the Craftsman Truck Series was going to race with them the day before. So that should be a February 28th. Should be a February 28th race there for the trucks, I believe, and then a March 1st IndyCar Grand Prix in St. Petersburg. And then that's not all. That's not the only IndyCar NASCAR crossover event you're going to see this next year. IndyCar is going to return to Phoenix, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago. The Indianapolis Star reported that as a very strong possibility, and it's now been confirmed. The IndyCar Series is going to return to Phoenix Raceway as part of a doubleheader weekend with the NASCAR Series. I believe they're going to run on the same day as the NASCAR Xfinity Series, so it seems like the idea is to have about a 3 o'clock locals time start, so about a 5 o'clock Eastern time start for the IndyCar race, and then that will transition in to the Xfinity race on the CW. But I think the big thing to keep in mind there is for race fans who don't have cable, don't have any streaming options, this is huge. If you just have an antenna and the only way you can watch races is via an antenna, you will be able to watch both races on that same day without ever having to subscribe to cable. You can have, as long as you have an antenna that picks up the CW and a Fox affiliate, you're golden. You're good to go. You got no problems watching that race. So cool news there, especially for the fans. And hopefully it being run with a NASCAR weekend, it hopefully addresses some of the attendance concerns that pretty much kept Phoenix off the schedule after it was last on the schedule at the end of the 2010s. They took that off because of dwindling crowd sizes. And so hopefully this kind of helps get more people interested in that IndyCar race. And I think that's good. I think IndyCar has always served as either a main event or a support event to something down there in Phoenix. Remember, for years, I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, the Copper World Classic was a very, very popular event down there in Phoenix for the USAC ranks. So hopefully we could get back to something like that, even if it is with NASCAR, not with USAC. Hopefully we can get back to a level where that event is a huge deal. And I think it's a great thing for the entire series of everybody, all of the race fans that are in Phoenix and in the American Southwest. I think that's a great move. So very happy to see that. Meanwhile, we already knew that the Arlington Grand Prix around that Jerry World was going to happen on March 15th, so we did already know that, but we're starting the season right off. Like I said, March 1st, March 7th, March 15th, then we go March 29th and Barber, so that'll be the earliest Barber has ever been held. It's going to be a late March, but IndyCar only has one race in April, and I think it's probably the best course of action. If you recall, last year IndyCar was having a big problem going up against the Masters and going up against the NCAA college basketball tournament. So in order to kind of avoid those clashes, the only IndyCar race that will be held in April is going to be the Long Beach Grand Prix on the 19th. So something to keep in mind there. And then, of course, obviously the month of May, no changes there. Grand Prix of Indianapolis still set to take place Mother's Day weekend, followed by the Indianapolis 500, obviously on Memorial Day weekend. So something to look forward to there. Obviously, the month of May never changes, typically doesn't change. And, of course, it's the same thing there. And, again, really minimal changes, still going to Detroit, still going to St. Louis after that. But the big change here is going to come in July. Obviously, with the World Cup happening in June and July, Fox and IndyCar had to work around what they could do in order to make sure that all of their races are still on over-the-air television. And that means that Nashville is no longer the season finale. And instead, they have opted to move Nashville to July 19th. And they will race that essentially right after the World Cup final is aired on Fox. So that means we're going to take the World Cup and we're going to basically move that and try and get as many viewers from that to watch an IndyCar oval race that's not in Indianapolis. Now, I am very disappointed in this move for a couple of reasons, but I understand why they did it. Number one, Nashville as the season finale just felt right. It was a great option for everybody in the Indianapolis area to be able to make a quick trip down there during a holiday weekend and watch a great race at the Nashville Superspeedway. And unfortunately, that has gone away now. They're not going to do that, and we'll get to who's going to host the 2026 season finale here in a couple of weeks, couple of minutes. Sorry, weeks. What am I talking about? A couple minutes. But that is very disappointing because I think it was a growing event. You had a lot of excitement around the finale. A lot of people were looking forward to the championship finale, even though Alex Palou had already clinched the title 2 races prior. There were still a lot of people who wanted to go out there and see that Nashville race on Labor Day weekend, and unfortunately, it's not going to be held on Labor Day weekend anymore. But the good news is it's going to expand to 400 miles, so it's going to be about as long as the NASCAR Cup Series race that's there, which is another huge deal. I mean, we've been talking about a race that's been basically around 300 miles the last couple of years. They continuously expand the race length. So if you recall, in 2024, that race was about 204 laps, maybe 205, and then this past year they extended it to 225 laps. Now we're getting a 400-miler on an oval, which I think is pretty good. I'm happy with a 400-mile oval race. It's not a 500-miler at Michigan or Pocono like maybe I think a lot of people would have preferred, but still a 400-miler at Nashville, which has been proving to put on some fantastic races. Then you throw that thing under the lights. I think it could be a really, really good event. It's just very disappointing it's no longer the season finale. But moving on to that, obviously we talked about Toronto moving to Markham, the Toronto Grand Prix of Indy Toronto, or whatever it's called, moving to Markham. That is set for August 16th. And then Milwaukee is going to get a doubleheader again. So IndyCar is going to tout this 6 oval thing, but it's really 5 ovals because they're trying to count Milwaukee twice, even though that's not the case. But still, I guess an addition of an oval, even though we are losing an oval, is better than nothing. It's better to stay stagnant on ovals, in my opinion, at least under this current IndyCar ownership. It's better that we keep the same amount of ovals than we lose more, because Lord knows this modern IndyCar administration wouldn't mind if we lost all of them but Indianapolis, it seems. But then the season is going to end on September 6th, and it is going back to Laguna Seca. Now, that is probably not what anybody wanted to hear. Nobody's really fully understanding this. This seems to be something Mark Miles wants because it's an opportunity for him to, again, engage with B people or try and get more people there. He likes to wine and dine people. I don't know. He didn't seem very happy going to Nashville, so he probably prefers that California life up in Monterey. But before I start disparaging Mark Miles far more, you can listen to me do that on a podcast. I do have a podcast that's Racing with Rob and Roller. Look it up wherever you get your podcast. But that's the gist of the IndyCar schedule for 2026. Like I said, the good St. Pete and Phoenix being with NASCAR, I think that's going to be really good, help with some fan engagement. And then obviously the Nashville night race. I think that is a good thing. That is overall a good thing. That's something that everybody, I think, who's been going to Nashville has been asking for, because it can get kind of hot even in late August, early September. It still can get pretty hot down there, especially if you're moving it to July. The last thing you want to do is have that race be held during the day, which I think really hurt Iowa, especially considering the fact that who wants to sit out there in almost 100-degree weather in bleacher seating and burn to a crisp? Night races, if you can get them, are typically better in that regard, especially during the summer. But then, like I said, the bad finale going to Laguna Seca, don't understand that. And again, no races in the Northeast and no races from west of the Mississippi until you get to Phoenix. Yikes. Not good. Not good, but maybe there's hope for the 2027 schedule? Maybe. We'll find out. But until then, we got to take a first break of the show. And when we come back, we're going to get into some Formula E news. Haven't talked about that in a while. Also, we're going to get into some Supercars news, and we're going to break down all the news and notes that broke from last week in NASCAR, and there's some lawsuit news that you're not going to want to miss. So don't go anywhere. You are watching The Racing Report. And we're back on the Racing Report. Thanks so much for sticking with us through that break. Let's go ahead and talk about Formula E news. Don't really talk about them very much, but I try to mention whenever there's a race coming on. We got some big news there. Citroen will replace Maserati on the Formula E grid next season. Stellantis is kind of retiring that Maserati brand and now making Citroen that brand. Yeah, see, I'm trying to be French about it. Pronounce it Citroen, which I believe is how you're supposed to pronounce it. A lot of people call it Citroen, I believe. You got to get that at the back of your throat. But despite my French lessons, which, by the way, I did not take French. I know nothing about French. I know far more Spanish and English than I do French. But they're going to replace Maserati next season on the Formula E grid. And they've signed Nick Cassidy and Jean-Eric Vergne to be their two drivers. So not a bad lineup. If you think about it, those are some pretty good drivers, especially in Formula E race winners. Obviously, Jev is a champion, a multi-time champion as well in Formula E. So some good news there. Meanwhile, also sticking around in Formula E, Taylor Barnard will join DS Penske. He's going to replace Jean-Eric Vergne at that race team next season, especially since McLaren has shut down. The McLaren Formula E team shut down at the end of last season without finding a buyer, but Taylor Barnard found a team, and he's going to replace Jev at DS Penske. He's going to partner with Maximilian Gunter. He'll be his teammate. Now let's talk about in the Supercars news. We did have our first of the Enduros over the weekend, and after a top 10 finish this weekend at the Bend, Job Stewart appears poised to replace the departing Jack LeBrock at Erebus next year. So something very interesting to keep in mind there. Looks like he impressed the Erebus bosses quite a bit when he was racing there with Cooper Murray over the course of the weekend at the Bend in that first Enduro. And it looks like that might have helped him maybe land a full-time Supercars job next year. We'll just have to wait and see. Obviously, we've got Bathurst coming up here in a little less than a month's time. We'll see if he could do just as good of a job at Bathurst, maybe really solidify that opportunity for him next year. We'll see. Now, let's move on to some NASCAR news, because boy, do we have a lot to get to today, and it all encompasses the latest developments in the 2311/FRM versus NASCAR lawsuit. A September 12th filing revealed what NASCAR's supposed quote-unquote gold codes are in the event of a complete boycott of the team. So, apparently, during this hearing, there was some court documents filed, and in one of those court documents, you had a presentation dated from June 27, 2024. So this was around the time NASCAR was trying to get through the new charter agreements for these teams. Now, apparently, they had all of these backup plans in mind in the event that some or none of the teams opted to even bother with this. And I think that's very interesting, to say the least, because some of these are very interesting. Let's get you through, at the very least, some of the big pieces to understand. So first, in the most extreme case, so this is NASCAR's plan for in the event that none of the teams signed the charter agreement. They planned, this was the reported plan, there was an 18-month plan to eliminate all the teams in NASCAR, basically get rid of all of them. And then NASCAR would hire all of the drivers and the mechanics, and then they would be NASCAR employees. Additionally, there would be a whole plan on how NASCAR would basically run every single team. So basically, in that event, NASCAR would have just said, okay, all of you teams, you're no longer around, you don't exist anymore, all of your employees are now free agents or whatever, and we could go and hire them. And here's how we're going to do that. And it's going to take us 18 months. In addition, we're going to build a garage, and we're going to redo this, and we're going to do all this so that we can house at least 30 cars to put on a season and a show. Absolutely crazy things to think about. But this is what NASCAR planned for in that event, which is very, very interesting. Now, in the event that only some of the teams boycotted, NASCAR had a list of potential charter buyers that ranged apparently from IndyCar teams to NASCAR Xfinity Series teams to even the band Mumford & Sons. Again, wild. So NASCAR was literally saying, well, if you don't sign these charters, we'll take them away, and we have potential buyers that we're going to give them to, which we've seen NASCAR already do in court filings. They already were trying to sell 2311 and FRM's charters after they didn't sign the charter agreement. So until that preliminary injunction that the judge brought down earlier this year was lifted, NASCAR couldn't do that, and now looks like they might, because this is a plan. This was a plan from the beginning, at least according to these recent court filings. NASCAR also, in the event of this, would have, let's say hypothetically, all of the teams boycotted, none of the teams showed up, none of the teams wanted to race. What they would have done is had Xfinity or truck events be promoted to the main event status in the event there are no teams to put on a cup race. So basically they would just say, okay, there's no cup race, but the Xfinity Series race is now the big draw. That's what you're all here to see. And they do whatever, they modify the cars and whatever to try and make it fair and things like that. And whew, lots to get down there. But I don't have all the time in the world to break down every single slide that was revealed in that court hearing. And if you really want to look it up, I highly recommend. I have retweeted Matt Weaver's tweet in which he posts screenshots of every single presentation slide. It's like literally just a PowerPoint slideshow that they made these in. Highly recommend checking that out. You might have to scroll down a little bit on my Twitter feed. I'm sorry if I tweet too much, but it is down there, or just look up Matt Weaver's account himself and find him that way. But very, very interesting developments going on there in the world of NASCAR when it comes to that lawsuit. And again, any kind of updates that we get in that lawsuit, we will make sure to bring them to you right here on the Racing Report. But that is it for the news segment of this week's show. But don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we've got to recap all of the races that happened this past weekend, and then we got to get you ready for the races that are coming up this weekend. So do not go anywhere. You are watching the Racing Report. And we're back on the Racing Report. Thanks so much for sticking through that break for us. Let's talk about some of the races that happened over the course of this weekend. NASCAR was in Bristol, and let me tell you something, we got some good old-fashioned Bristol races. I thought it was very entertaining. Lane Riggs winning the Truck Series race at Bristol, locking himself now into the next round of the playoffs. Eric Almirola coming in and getting that done as well in the Xfinity Series, beating out some of the Xfinity Series regulars, which may or may not be controversial, but I digress. And then Christopher Bell winning in the Cup Series. That means the first three rounds of the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs, the first three races in the first round of the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs were swept by Joe Gibbs Racing. Obviously, you had Chase Briscoe winning in Darlington, Denny Hamlin then winning at Gateway, and now Christopher Bell winning at Bristol. And let me tell you something about this Bristol race. Whatever we got to do to recreate it, we got to do it. Because let me tell you something, that tire wear made for a fantastic race and a very enjoyable race. I know that there's some people who might say, that's not really what I want. That's not really what I want to see out of a NASCAR. But here's the thing. In a world where you've got all this dirty air in these next-gen cars, I think the best way to really create passing is by heavy tire wear. Make drivers have to conserve their tires, have to manage their tires. Let's see some different pit strategies going on. Let's see how many spots fresh tires really matter. Let's watch fresh tires really matter when it comes to making up spots again. I was very entertained. I'm very curious to see if other people were entertained. It seemed like the Jeff Gluck poll was very highly shifted towards the yes option. But overall, I was very entertained. Love to see those tires degrade at Bristol. I think that's the best way to make it. Also, I think when Bristol is a low-line fest, because this is the thing. This is the other thing. This might be very controversial to some people. But if you think about Bristol, before they did the reconfiguration at the end of 2007, Bristol was always a low-line, ride the bottom and bump and run kind of racetrack. Well, when you have modern Bristol and you throw some little PJ1 down on the bottom groove, you basically make the top groove unusable, because then it becomes just a cesspool for debris and tire rubber that's falling off the cars. I think that made for a better race, because you had cars driving down on the bottom of the track and having to bump and run each other. Now, Brad Keselowski tried to bump and run Christopher Bell in order to win the race, and ended up giving him a bump draft and pushing him about 3 car lengths ahead. maybe these cars have some issues, but I think I do think that Saturday night was indeed a step in the right direction for NASCAR. Now, let's go ahead and wrap up this weekend of races. We've got NASCAR and Cup and Truck Series. They're going to New Hampshire. NASCAR starting their round of 12. We do know the drivers that were eliminated. That was Alex Bowman, Austin Dillon, Shane Van Gisbergen, and Josh Berry were the 4 drivers that were eliminated from the playoff competition, and they will not move on into the round of 12. Obviously, very disappointing for Alex Bowman, but just getting by was Austin Cindric by the hair of his nose, just about hanging in there. Cindric is staying alive in the round of 12 in the playoffs, but Alex Bowman, unfortunately, is not. No wins, had a bad couple of races, still had a good finish to Bristol, but I think just got put behind too far by that bad Darlington, and then a bad race at Darlington, and then struggling kind of at Gateway. So, but then hey, I didn't talk about this. Supercars was at the Bend. We had our first Enduro of the season as well. Brody Kostecki was the winner there. So some very good news there. He got a win after not really having won most of the season. It's been a while since Brody has been back in victory lane, but he got it done this weekend at the Bend. Now Supercars is going to Bathurst here in a couple of weeks' time, so looking forward to that. It's going to be next month in October. But like I said, the races this weekend, let's go ahead and talk about that. Like I said, NASCAR Cup Series and the Truck Series are going to be in New Hampshire. The Xfinity Series is off this weekend. They will return next week at Kansas Speedway for that race. Meanwhile, Formula One returns after a week off in Azerbaijan. They're going to be racing around the Baku City Street Circuit. Looking forward to that. I think that'll be very fun to watch. Hopefully it is a good race. It has been in the past. Hopefully we get another good one this year. But hey, and then IMSA is going to be here. We got a couple of big races here in the state of Indiana. IMSA is going to have their 6-hour battle at the Bricks coming up this weekend at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And then ARCA is going to have the Kentucky and Ford Dealers 200 down at Salem Speedway on Saturday night. I think that's going to be a great one to watch. I love ARCA at Salem. I went to ARCA at Salem with my dad several years ago, and it was also on the same day as a Pacers playoff game back in 2018. My dad and I did our own version of the Indiana Double, drove down to Salem, watched the ARCA race there, then drove back up and watched the Pacers play in a playoff game back then. But now it's not happening when the Pacers are playing anymore. But still a reason, if you can, maybe. I don't recommend doing the double this week, but if you feel like you can do it, maybe you can. But I wouldn't recommend it. It's a lot of driving. But that is it for this week's episode of The Racing Report. As always, hey, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And if you did like this show, please do follow me on social media. That way I know you like this show. You can do so by looking up at rpeeters33. That's RPEETERS 33. And then, as always, make sure you have that handy-dandy little WTHR Plus app installed on your smart TV so that you get brand new episodes as soon as they were released. We release episodes every single week. You won't want to miss a single one. So, for WTHR Plus, my name is Rob Peeters, and this has been The Racing Report.